Ladies and gentlemen, Keith Richards.
In this bizarre crossing of entertainment worlds, it was the job of SNL creator Lorne Michaels to save Keith Richards from a lengthy jail sentence. Look, while Keith Richards spent most of his life in the spotlight flirting with different types of trouble, you could never make the case for him being a heinous criminal. Music has had its fair share of troublesome and abusive characters, many of whom have been reprimanded for their dangerous crimes. But Richards, well, he was more of a happy-go-lucky style rule breaker. His one mission was to get as high as possible, wherever possible, and not to hurt anyone in the process. Still, to this day, the Rolling Stones guitarist acts as the poster boy for the carefree side effects of mass drug use. He's a one-in-a-million human being who seems to be devoid of the physical and mental impacts of consuming everything in sight, to a point where he's actually damaging to those trying to initiate meaningful conversations about the problematic nature of hedonism and rock and roll. And so even though that we know the glossy reputation of sex, drugs and rock and roll had a dark underbelly to it, for the most part, Keith Richards eluded it. And so buoyed by the megastardom of the Rolling Stones, Keith Richards in the late 70s decided to take his debauchery global. And so in 1977 he was arrested in a Toronto hotel by the Canadian Mounties, also known as the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, after they found 22 grams of heroin in his suite. And that was a hefty amount of heroin, even for the legendary drug user Keith Richards. So much so that the authorities didn't want to just charge him with possession, but possession with the purpose of trafficking. But that was a crime in Canada which could be prosecuted anywhere between 7 years and life, which left the future of Keith Richards firmly in the balance. But then after Richards posted bond, he then had his passport confiscated, which meant he was held in Canada until he could get a special visa process to take him back to the United States. But this entire brush with the law didn't prove to be enough of a deterrent for Keith Richards. By the time October 1978 rolled around, the month of his trial, he was still using. But the entire experience of this proved to be problematic for the production, and with all of this in the backdrop, several of Richards' appearances in skits were cut. And so somewhat concerned by this entire ordeal, as well as the future of his band, Mick Jagger roped in SNL creator Lorne Michaels, who was also a Canadian native, asking him to testify on behalf of Richards at his upcoming trial. Understandably, the fear of perjury loomed over Lorne Michaels, who had seen firsthand that Richards still wasn't clean. But still, Michaels fulfilled Jagger's request and decided to put Richards' drug use to one side and instead focus on the arbitrary nature of his creative defense. He proceeded to label Keith as the catalyst of the band and brought weight to their cultural relevance by explaining his decision to cast the Stones over Muhammad Ali as SNL hosts, calling the group the #1 rock and roll band in the world. It was then rumoured that he anchored his argument in the point on the grounds that Canadians would not want to put a real artist in jail. Thankfully for the Rolling Stones, Lorne Michaels' intuition that day was well placed, because Keith Richards got off of a suspended sentence and a community service obligation to play a benefit concert for the blind. And that was a decision rooted in the fact that his other character witness that day was a young blind fan named Rita. Richards came back to SNL once more in 1988, fulfilling the more simple role of just the musical guest. While he eluded authorities from 1977 onwards, we all know that he never really took rehabilitation seriously, which I guess is something for Lorne Michaels to grapple with.